In the blazing heart of the Wild West, one rancher's courage is tested when a stranger collapses at his doorstep. Bitten, fevered, and fading fast. What he does next will change both their lives forever. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The Arizona sun burned like molten brass over the empty plains as Caleb Rowan guided his horse back toward Dry Creek Ranch. The day had been long, the kind that baked sweat into the skin and dust into every pore. His shirt clung to him, his hat shadowed his stern eyes, and all he wanted was water and silence. But as he reached the ridge overlooking his property, he saw something strange, dust rising where there shouldn't have been any. His hand instinctively went to the revolver on his belt. No one visited Dry Creek without a reason, and out here reasons were rarely good. He spurred his horse forward, eyes narrowing against the glare. The figure ahead stumbled more than walked. It wasn't a cowboy or a bandit. It was a woman, alone, pale and staggering, as if every step was a battle. Caleb slowed as he drew closer, his suspicion giving way to something else entirely. She wore a torn dress the color of sand, her hair tangled, her skin blistered by the desert sun. When she finally looked up, her lips were cracked, her eyes wild with pain. "Please," she whispered hoarsely. "Help me!" Her voice broke, and she collapsed into the dust before he could even dismount. Caleb jumped off his horse and knelt beside her. Her pulse fluttered weakly beneath his fingers, but what froze him was the angry red swelling on her thigh. 2 puncture marks glistened where the skin had begun to darken. Rattlesnake. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, his mind racing. He'd seen bites before. Most didn't make it through the hour. She was fading fast. Without wasting another second, he scooped her into his arms, her body limp and burning with fever, and carried her toward the ranch house, his boots thudding hard on the dry earth. Inside, the cabin was dim and cool compared to the furnace outside. He laid her down gently on the long wooden table he used for repairs and grabbed a knife, a bandana, and a bottle of whiskey from the shelf. "Don't you give up on me, lady," he said roughly, his voice low but urgent. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath shallow. "What's your name?" he asked, though he doubted she could hear him. "Clara." "Finch," she whispered faintly, then winced as the pain surged through her leg. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd never been a doctor, but the war had taught him things a man couldn't unlearn. He poured whiskey over the wound, and she cried out. "I know," he said softly. "I know it burns, but it'll keep the rot off." He took a deep breath, tied the bandana tight above the bite to slow the venom, then looked her in the eye. "You ain't gonna like this," he muttered. Her vision blurred, but she saw him bend closer, steady as a blade. Caleb did what he had to. He pressed his lips to the wound and drew the poison out, spitting it to the floor again and again until the blood ran cleaner. When he finally pulled away, his face was pale and his hands trembled slightly. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock and her shallow breaths. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and covered the wound with a clean rag. "You're safe now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He moved her to the cot near the window and poured her a glass of water. She tried to drink, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I thought I was going to die out there." Caleb nodded slowly. "You almost did," he replied. "Desert don't forgive the careless." He turned away, trying to hide the strange tightness in his chest. It had been years since he'd had anyone in this house besides himself and the wind. As the sun began to dip behind the red mesas, painting the world in gold and blood, Caleb lit a lantern and pulled up a chair beside her. She was asleep now, her face softer, her breathing steady. He studied her, her fine features, her delicate hands. She didn't look like a drifter or a ranch hand. Something about her spoke of towns and manners, not dust and sweat. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it. "What are you running from, Clara Finch?" he whispered into the quiet. Outside, coyotes howled at the rising moon, and the wind carried the scent of sagebrush through the open window. Caleb loaded his rifle and set it against the wall just in case. The desert had a way of testing every soul that crossed it, and he had a feeling this woman's troubles were far from over. He looked out across the land, his land, and for the first time in years he felt something stirring in his chest. Maybe it was duty, maybe it was fate, but one thing was certain. Whoever Clara Finch was, she had changed the quiet of Dry Creek forever. The night settled heavy over Dry Creek, the kind of silence that only came after danger had passed or before it returned. Caleb sat by the dying fire, his rifle laid across his knees, eyes drifting between the window and the woman sleeping on his cot. Clara Finch had barely stirred since he'd drawn the venom from her leg. Her fever had broken, but she was still pale, her breathing shallow. Outside, the coyotes' howls faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. Caleb's instincts told him this calm was temporary. Trouble had a way of finding people like her. When dawn broke, he poured water into a tin cup and helped Clara sit up. "You need to drink," he said, his voice gentle but firm. She obeyed, though her hands trembled. "You saved my life," she murmured, her voice rough from thirst. "That's twice now I've owed a stranger my thanks." Caleb shrugged. "I just did what needed doing." But as he studied her face in the morning light, he noticed something. The clean cut of her nails, the quality of her torn dress, the locket hanging around her neck. She wasn't a ranch hand or a traveler. She belonged somewhere else, somewhere important. He cooked breakfast in silence, beans, biscuits, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. She ate carefully, her eyes darting toward the window every so often. Caleb noticed, and after a long pause asked, "Who are you running from, Miss Finch?" She froze, her spoon halfway to her lips. "You wouldn't believe me," she said softly. He set his cup down. "Try me." She drew a shaky breath, then spoke. "Men? Outlaws? They robbed a bank in Yuma 3 days ago. I was there, I saw everything. They shot the marshal, the teller, everyone. I only lived because I hid under a wagon. But they saw my face before I ran." Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd heard about the Yuma robbery. The law said 6 men did it. No survivors. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. "They already have," she replied. "I saw them in the distance before I collapsed yesterday. They must have followed my tracks through the canyon." She looked down, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to bring danger here." Caleb stood, loading his rifle. "You didn't bring it." "It was already waiting. Out here, danger's the only thing that visits regular." He glanced toward the open door, the bright horizon beyond. "If they're coming, we'll be ready." The hours crawled by, heavy and tense. Caleb patched the windows with boards, checked his ammunition, and moved the horses into the barn. Clara tried to help, but stumbled, still weak from the bite. "You just rest," he told her, handing her a revolver. "If anyone but me opens that door, you use this." She looked down at the weapon, her hand trembling. "I've never shot a man." Caleb gave a dry smile. "You won't have to aim that hard out here. They'll be close enough." As the sun began to set, he climbed the lookout ridge above the ranch. From there, he could see miles of open desert. And then, dust. Riders, 3 of them. He hurried back down, his boots striking hard against the dirt. "They're coming," he said simply. Clara's eyes widened, fear returning to her face. Caleb doused the lamps and took position by the window. The sound of hooves grew louder until the first shadowy figures appeared at the fence line. One shouted, "We know she's in there, rancher! Hand her over and we'll leave you breathing." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "You picked the wrong ranch," he muttered, then fired. The first shot split the air, shattering the quiet. A man fell from his horse. The others fired back, bullets slamming into the wooden walls, splinters flying like sparks. Clara ducked behind the table, clutching the revolver. Her heart pounded as smoke filled the cabin. Caleb moved with cold precision, reloading, firing again, never wasting a shot. "Stay down!" he shouted as a bullet shattered the lantern above them, scattering flame across the floor. She crawled to stamp it out, then saw movement at the rear door. One of the outlaws had circled around. "Caleb!" she cried, raising the gun. He spun just as the man kicked the door open. Clara pulled the trigger. The blast echoed like thunder. The man fell backward into the dirt, motionless. Her hands shook violently, but her aim had been true. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Only the wind moved now. Caleb stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the horizon. The last outlaw was gone, his horse disappearing into the pink haze of dawn. He lowered the rifle slowly, then turned back toward the house. Clara sat on the floor, the revolver still in her lap, tears streaking her face. He knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You did fine," he said quietly. "It's over." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to kill him." He nodded. "No one ever does. But you're alive. That's what matters." When the first rays of morning stretched across the desert, Caleb and Clara stood on the porch, the sky painted in gold and rose. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and renewal. "What'll you do now?" he asked after a long silence. She looked out toward the horizon. "I don't know. I can't go back, and I can't keep running forever." He studied her for a moment, then said, "You could stay here. Ain't much, but it's safe." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "Safe sounds like heaven." Caleb tipped his hat, a rare grin crossing his face. "Then welcome to Dry Creek, Miss Finch." And as the desert wind carried the scent of dawn through the open fields, two strangers stood side by side, bound not by chance but by survival, courage, and something quietly beginning to grow between them, something stronger than fear.